So welcome everybody. I think we all know that the reason we're here today is to celebrate the 25-year anniversary of AbelCine. It is quite an achievement, and I wanted to, in this panel, take a look at a snapshot of the technology back when the company started in 1989. And not necessarily go through in a linear fashion what led to what to get us to 2014, because if we did that, I think we'd be here till the 27th anniversary of AbelCine. But to simply take a snapshot of then, take a snapshot of now, and then to turn it on the panel and ask them, how have these changes affected their craft, their work? The art of cinematography, the art of being a technician on a film set. So before we do that, though, I thought we'd just take a moment to acknowledge two gentlemen who are probably inside doing business, and that's Pete and Rich Abel. This is, again, a snapshot of 1989. It reminds me of this Mitch Hedberg joke. I have to read the joke. I can sometimes be funny, but I can't remember jokes. One time this guy handed me a picture of him and said, "Here's the picture of me when I was younger. Every picture is of you when you were younger."
By definition.
"Here's a picture of me when I'm older." You son of a bitch, how'd you pull that off? Let me see that camera. What's it look like? I don't think Mitch Hedberg necessarily ever saw Benjamin Button, where you could take a picture of someone when they were older. But this is a snapshot of Pete and Rich at the bench in 1989. Here they are today, happy, successful businessmen. If you look at Pete, he's learned a lot about business since 1989. Back then, he thought to start a company from the ground up meant that you had to sit on the ground, or that, you know, to get in on the ground floor, you had to have everything spread onto the floor. Now, he's you know, a confident businessman, content in the knowledge that he owns dozens of office chairs and other office furniture in you know, 3 offices spread across North America. And then his partner Rich, showing early how he can multitask, drink a Diet Coke, be on the phone, and service lenses all at the same time, all under the veneer of this fashionable spiky haircut. Now, 25 years later, on the stairway to success, with another spiky kind of haircut.
At least they got hair.
That's a good point. 20 years ago, AbelCine started with Aton. I think we all know that. There were about 20 products in the line. Rich told me how they, in the early days, had to build a multi-slot charger for the Aton because they could only charge one battery at a time, and you can't send out a camera package with one battery, and how Pete had to write the original manual for the company. Now there are 100,000 products, and let's at least give a little acknowledgement, maybe they can hear us inside, to Pete and Rich Abel. First, Bill Bennett is the first cinematographer with a career consisting of primarily shooting television commercials to be invited to join the American Society of Cinematographers. He's been shooting commercials, features, and TV for over 30 years. On the technology side, Bill was a partner with Howard Preston in the design and creation of the Microforce zoom control, which is seen on every set throughout the world. He was an advisor to Arri in the design of the 435 film camera and the Alexa digital camera. Welcome, Mr. Bennett. Robert Primes, ASC, a pioneer in digital cinematography, having won the first ASC Cinematography Award ever given to digital production. Bob has received 2 Emmys, 6 other nominations. He's on the board of the ASC, the Local 600, the National Film Preservation Board, the Art Institute of Los Angeles, and the Widescreen Film Festival. In 2008, he was awarded the President's Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society of Camera Operators. He's also a teacher. Thank you for joining us. Michelle DeLorimier is a DIT based in the Los Angeles area, predominantly working in commercials. She started out shooting high-8 footage during the revolution in Nepal in 1989 for television. Spent some time in Southeast Asia, then back to the Bay Area. Worked at a camera rental house, servicing film and digital beta cameras. Michelle has spent several years doing time track camera array shoots all over the world and works as a video controller for events around the world. Suny Behar, director, cinematographer, consultant, and educator. He began in theater, then earned a master's at the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Suny's focus on technology and trends has led him to serve as a consultant to a number of Fortune 500 companies, including Panasonic, HBO, Canon, and Google. He has photographed the HBO Camera Assessment Series for the last 4 years. He's also a teacher. And last but youngest on our panel, giving us a different perspective, Rob Givens began his career as a professional cinematographer in Los Angeles over 9 years ago. He's worked his way up through the ranks from first assistant to operator to DP, focusing primarily on feature films. In addition to features, Rob photographs commercials, internet content, and the occasional music video. He's a member of Local 600 as well. So in this snapshot, and I do have a slide somewhere on one of these computers, but the essence of it was to look at camera technology in 1989. It seemed to divide into 3 kind of categories. There was the high-end film cameras. Panavision and Arri had relatively new cameras in those days. The cost of a camera system was somewhere between, if you added in all the magazines, and I certainly know I was with Panavision for 20 years, we didn't sell cameras, but if you were to add it up and think about selling those cameras with a complete package, not including lenses, it would be somewhere in the order of $500,000 to $700,000. In performance terms, you're looking at nominally 4K, ISO 400 film stock in those days. Then we had 16 millimeter, maybe it was 2K. Price range went up to about $35,000, $40,000, maybe a little higher with an Aton. And then on the other side, the HL79, I think, sold their 5,000th camera or 50,000th camera by 1989. The price range for a Sony Betacam or an Ikki 79 in those days was $35,000 to $50,000, $60,000. We then take a snapshot of 2014, and we've got this cluster of technology from Aeroflex, from Sony, from Canon, from Vision Research. This new Panasonic camera is very interesting. Price range, what the old 2/3-inch video cameras were, $50,000 to $75,000. A difference of tenfold from what it was 25 years ago. If you move over, you've got this other group of cameras pushing up the A7S camera, the Canon digital still cameras. There's a cluster of them 10 times less expensive than the other cluster. And then we look at the introduction of an iPhone 6 or a series of GoPro cameras, another order of 10 magnitude. How has this affected the craft of cinematography? Bill, let's start with you. What does it mean to be a cinematographer now, and how is it different from 25 years ago?
Wow. I think the others up here could agree with me that the pace of development in 1989 was a much slower pace. Kodak would introduce a new film stock, every 3 or 4 years. We would all test it for 6 months before we would ever dare use it. Sometimes Aeroflex would introduce a new camera maybe every 5 years, maybe every 8 years, something like that. Panavision would incrementally improve their cameras and introduce a camera, every 10 or 12 years? Something like that, in that sort of time scale. And now fast forward to the current era where there's a camera introduced on a weekly basis, it seems like, from very expensive $150,000 per item cameras down to the little thing that you just won, Christian. Hold that up. Christian just won this. It's a competitor made by Suny to the GoPro, right? It shoots HD, maybe even higher resolution. It's completely waterproof and costs $200 maybe? I know you didn't buy it, you won it, but nonetheless. But that makes phenomenal images. So we have this incredible array of tools to work with, and in my opinion, it is an incredibly exciting time to be working as a cinematographer. It's challenging to learn all these technologies because just like you guys, we're running as hard as we can, coming to events like this, talking to as many camera and lens representatives as possible. I just had a long conversation with the people from Fujinon about their current lenses and what other people are making as well. It is a never-ending learning process. The younger people out there don't think it's ever going to stop, because it's not. It's just going to keep on accelerating. At some point, you kind of have to decide what part of the business you're going to specialize in, because there's really no way to know all of it. There really isn't, which is why filmmaking is a team effort where we have cinematographers and then camera assistants, excellent DITs that help us, post-production people, each one specializing in a certain part. There's Sarah from the company of Kodak that makes the recording devices for many cameras that we use. I couldn't fully understand exactly what her company does. There's no way to know exactly what. So we have to rely upon the knowledge of others to be able to achieve what we do.
I did go through the trouble of asking these folks to send in pictures, so let's...
Oh, look at that.
And Bill went back to 1971.
I had hair.
Yeah.
That was a student film I was making in college, so I'm dating myself. But, yeah, and I was skinny, too. Bob.
Let's talk about Bob Primes.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's a very debonair shot there, Bob.
You haven't changed at all.
He hasn't changed at all.
I look happier in 2014 than
Yeah, you do. You do. So as a distinguished cinematographer with your various awards, has the name cinematographer, has the title changed in the past 25 years?
Well, I know that distinguished means older. And I will, without any question at all, I'm the reigning old-timer here. And so I will talk a little bit more about old times than new times. Also, I think it's a little contrarian, and I like being contrarian. In 1989, I was shooting a movie called Bird on a Wire. Big action film, and it was kind of an action comedy romance. Okay. And we were shooting it with BLs, which the crew that was used to Panavision hated, but I had some loyalties and I brought BLs in, and the politics are important.
I think you need to describe what a BL to them
is. A BL is about the first handheld 35 millimeter sound, almost quiet enough for sound. They weren't the most quiet cameras. 35 millimeter camera from Aeroflex. Okay, so you have 1,000-foot magazines, because in a drama with dialogue, the 4 minutes of a 4-minute magazine, you'd be changing all the time and interrupted the flow, and if you got a false start and all that. So you got a 1,000-foot magazine. That's already about, it's huge, okay? So the camera is heavy. The film stock is 400 on a good day, probably more like 250 or 320, I don't remember what it is. It has latitude, but not like the latitude we have now. You can't see it on a monitor. You have to know where the shadows are and the highlights are, so you're a little bit more careful. And
it lasted 11 minutes.
Yeah, that's right. You have 11 minutes with the film, and you change it. It took more light. The focus is difficult because it's full size, and everything was slower. You had to light more because you didn't have as much latitude. You couldn't shoot in the dark areas. They had to be lit in places you could light now. and the camera was big and heavy. If you were going to move it, it'd pretty much be on a dolly or something big. Now, we look at that and we say, oh, you poor people, now we've got all this latitude and all this. My contention is that the director of photography and the artists have gotten less out of the advancements of technology than the bean counters. The people with the spreadsheets see this, oh my gosh, look at this, the Panasonic GH4 looks like 35 millimeter. You used to look like, my gosh, you can shoot in these low lights. Instead of us being able to use that as great artistic tools, it says, go faster, put up 7 of these things and shotgun it and just grab it. Don't be so concerned about composition. We can crop it later on, we can do it. It doesn't have to be that good there. We'll use the post-production tools. So the other night, I saw The Mill and the Cross at a screening that John Bailey moderated. It was largely one camera. It was stunning. They always had time to fix a single camera composition and really make that composition and add things and subtract things into it and make the light just right and cut it with nets and shape it until it was just gorgeous. Now, cinematographers of today, I believe, are just as good as the cinematographers of yesterday. The tools are different and we have to learn the tools, but it's the time. And right now, well, first of all, 14-hour days make you stupid. You're not smart after working that long, but somebody on a spreadsheet doesn't know that. All they just know is number of hours in doing it. So I really think that the old days, which I have to say were inferior technologically, may have been superior in the sense that the big, heavy technology made it you had to take your time. You had to take time on each shot. And I think maybe the results are something that we could learn from today.
Very, very interesting perspective.
It's an old-timer's
Michelle,
perspective.
You were in Southeast Asia when this picture was taken. Here you are now. As a technician, do you have to know everything? Do you have to know every single new piece of equipment that comes out, or can you specialize? I mean, what's the strategy?
That's a very good question. I think the idea is to know as much as possible about the part of the technology that you specialize in. And I think you do have to specialize. There is too many changes. As Bob was saying, and as Bill was saying, it's not that every week there's a new camera, but every week there's something enabled in a camera that changes the nature of the camera or what's possible, and sometimes inadvertently disables other functions. And that's something that if one specializes in a narrower band, it's easier to stay on top of those weekly changes.
Very interesting.
Suny, I don't know how old you were in 1989, but you were too old to be sitting on Santa's lap.
Yes, this is true.
It's such a disturbing photo. There's some Molson Canadian near some cookies. I'm on a woman Santa with like no red eye reduction, and I've got this helmet hair. It just shows the 80s, anything went. I mean, that was a time when just anything was possible.
And where's her right hand?
I found that photo at 2:30 in the morning and sent it to Mo without censoring myself. It was a mistake. I guarantee you, it was a mistake.
Well, Suny, you specialized in a sense in the variety, as being out there testing and consulting with various manufacturers and networks like HBO. What's your perspective on the craft and how it's changed?
Well, I think when I think back at the, 1989 or the early 90s, there was a very clear divide in the type of images you would see. There were the cinematic images that we saw at the movies, and then there was what we could do with NTSC. And that was just two completely different worlds. You had the tube cameras with, never the same color, going at it and trying to get, 4.5 stops of dynamic range. And there was just an expectation that video just looked like video. It just had this thing, that if you wanted to see a cinematic image, you had to go to the movie theater. And I think that's the biggest change today. Right now, as Bob was mentioning, the G8 IV, you can grab very entry-level pieces of equipment that can generate a cinematic image. And so that, I think, has changed the balance a little bit of what's going on. Because, as Bob was saying, now people are using that as an excuse. Well, obviously, if a kid did that in 2 minutes, you don't need lighting because it's 4K and it's HD. You have all these crazy misnomers that it doesn't take craft anymore because the tool is doing such a good job cinematizing it, giving you shallow depth of field, giving you the bokeh that you got in the theater. But those are, they're red herrings. They're misleading to what it actually took to make a beautiful image. But that, I think, especially with the bean counters, is not ever accounted for. They look at the tool as creating the cinematography rather than the cinematographer making it because the tool is available. So that's something I've seen a lot, and when I do a lot of consulting, I teach at UCLA, it's something I try to debunk a lot. This tool does this, and yes, it has made the entry level, the mezzanine cinematography image, that look that we've been looking at in the theaters, is available. But it's just the starting point. And so that's the first thing. But I think the biggest difference to me, honestly, has been WYSIWYG. At the time when I used to shoot film, when I went to film school, I only shot film. I loved having a black and white monitor that was in standard F. And the reason I love that is because I was using my meter, and everybody had to trust that the image that I saw in my head was going to come out on dailies. There was just a level of trust between the director and the cinematographer. Now, the monitors are so good, and we're now talking about bringing 4K on set, where it's literally what you see is what you get. So now the DITs do have to apply a LUT that is extremely accurate, because everybody's walking by the monitor as a cinematographer now. And craft services will walk by and be, oh, that's a little dark. I don't know. You can do it, but I wouldn't do that. What? Who is that guy? You know what I mean? Everybody who walks by has an opinion on the image. So now I think it's made it harder on the DP because everybody's eyes are on the creative process. You can't think anymore. Well, one of my cinematographer instructors at film school used to say his favorite thing to do when he didn't know what to do was to take his light meter and walk out a little bit and start just pressing it. Because people would say, don't bug the DP, he's thinking. He's like, he wasn't thinking about that at all. He was thinking about something completely different. But he was in his process. That process is gone because people are watching the monitor, and they presume to know exactly what you're doing all the time. And I think that's the biggest change I've seen.
Yeah, no, I remember distinctly, Panavision, we had this round table, invited cinematographers in for lunch. You've been there. And a number of them, I remember coming in saying, don't ever make that video assist color. No matter what you do, keep that black and white video assist. Of course, time marched on. Rob Givens, again, traded in his sword, it seems, for a kit. Talk about the apprenticeship process now.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The apprenticeship. I have worked as a first AC and then into operator and second unit DP for several different DPs, and it's a fantastic way to learn. It is trial by fire, but you do have the guidance and the helping hand to learn the tools as you go on set. And looking toward what the guys of the previous generation of mine have done. And taking inspiration from them, I came into this sort of at the tail end of film's commonplace, I suppose. The first film I shot out of film school in 2005, to date myself, was on 35 anamorphic, and it was a wonderful experience. And there were many times where I was walking around with the meter going, "Oh my God, what am I doing here?" And that was a brilliant experience. But now I've had to transition my career into the digital age, and I think it's been sort of a bumpy ride of trial and error as we try to keep up with the rat race of these cameras. But the thing for me has been watching what the other DPs that I've worked for as an operator, learning from them, watching their lighting, watching and respecting the craftsmanship of the dolly grip and the gaffer and the challenges that the ACs are up against with focus and taking all of that in. As an operator, being able to sit, you get this objectivity sitting there where you don't have the burden of the DP's responsibilities on your shoulder, and you can wait and watch, and that's been important for me to learn how to take my first steps as a DP.
Let's. Oh, this is me, by the way, and more recently, I mean, I was going to earlier talk about 1989. And how we were on the cusp of high definition. I found a couple of old articles. The Controversy Continues was about a show that shot with an early high definition camera, 11-25-60 camera, and whether or not it was rated at 100 or 200, whether that was the correct number. That was the big deal. And then the Digital Revolution talks about D1 and D2, standard definition. But let's move on, because we've talked about the camera technology and taken our snapshot. But one point I want to make. In Plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. In 1989, Airflex introduced the 765 camera, and 25 years later, out comes the Alexa 65. Just thought that was an interesting coincidence.
Gorgeous 65 millimeter camera.
Yeah.
Images. Did you ever look through one of the optical finders? It was gorgeous.
I've shot with that camera, the 765, and I remember my longtime camera assistant. Every time we'd line up a shot, then he would look through to check focus and things like that. And every time he'd get back up from the viewfinder, he'd look at me and say, "This is God's format," because it was a true 2.2 to 1, a widescreen aspect ratio with no special anamorphic lenses, nothing, just spherical lenses, gigantic film.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about lenses.
Can I
yes.
make a comment on something? I mean, I can't. We talked about monitors. We talked about hiding the monitor because everybody's an example. I go the other direction on that. I don't want to shoot a flat image and look at the scope and say, we got it all, and Stefan in post is going to get all the credit for making it look beautiful. I love that the technology allows you to make a truly beautiful picture on set. Not only that, but if you take the trouble to make your monitor image gorgeous, nobody screws with you. They screw with you if they say, well, that looks a little flat or anything else like that. But if it's beautiful, almost always you get the feeling, oh God, that is really beautiful, and they leave you alone. The same thing in color correction a lot of the times if you're moving along. And I think the idea is to get your craft and the black tint and your DIT and everything going, so what you're shooting, whether you burn it in or do LUTs or anything else, is a whole thing to discuss. But I once was told in the early days of the F900 that going out in the desert, I better shoot it flat. I better bring the blacks up and everything like that, because it's so hard. So I did as I was told. I looked at it, and I couldn't shoot that way. It looked like crap. There's another four-letter word I was thinking about, but I'll call it crap. Okay. So I darkened the contrast. I got the right color. I made it look good. I used maybe more lighting than I had to, but I couldn't give my crew a crappy looking image all day. I would break their morale. I wanted everybody to see something that everybody got off on. Everybody loves visuals. So I got to say, to me, rather than hiding it and not being an expert, I think go the extra mile. Do something that you feel good about emotionally and you're proud about, and do that in the monitors. Anyway, I just had a comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. On the optics side, in 25 years, I mean, arguably, 1989, maybe the Panavision Primo lenses were top of the line, and maybe now the Leicas and the new Cook anamorphics are, if not the top, or near the top. And,
I like Fujifilm zooms.
And they have one thing in common. That's this lens designer, Ian Neal, who's an old friend of mine. And I talked to him before this panel to get his perspective on the evolution of lens design and lens technology over the past 25 years. And I mean, his input was quite unabashedly that overall the changes have been rather incremental. Nothing like the totally disruptive side of the cameras and the imagers. And I'm curious from your perspective if the fact that the lenses, high performance lenses, there are many more of them. There are different manufacturers that have come in and out of the field. But if the optics has been something of a stabilizing force, and I think I know the answer to the cinematographer, or if there's something else going on with lenses.
Well, there was almost a huge disruptive sidetrack. If you remember, the early high definition cameras were 2/3 inch. So all of a sudden, all the lens manufacturers are heading that way. If you remember, Panavision came out with a series of 2/3 inch zooms, yep. And then Zeiss came out with the Digiprimes, and people made zoom for that, and then now that's gone away. So there was a sidetrack into 2/3 inch, and then now it's back to full-size sensors, and then here's a coming disruptive technology. You just showed a camera a moment ago. The sensors are getting bigger. So the sensors getting larger are starting to obsolete a lot of the lenses that exist. Like right now, the Red Dragon has a very large sensor. The Alexa, when you shoot it in open gate, has a very large sensor. And then Arri comes along and shows us this camera that has a sensor that has a 2 1/4 inch diagonal.
Right, right.
You know, I add to that too that I found that when the sensors were low resolution and didn't have a lot of MTF, the lenses had to be really sharp to make up for essentially the dullness we were getting in the image. What I find now is exactly the opposite. Like, I've done 2 or 3 shows on where the P vintages are constantly asked for. They're basically old, recased lenses, and the lenses are faulty, if you will. The coatings are old, and the contrast is fairly bad, if you will. And I find that now, the better the sensors are going, we're going the opposite direction with the glass. If the glass is really sharp and clean, and the sensor is really sharp and clean, now we've got another problem. So it's funny that the lenses have lagged so long in progress. They've allowed the cameras to get really sharp, and now we're like, stop progressing, go back. We like the casings and the barrelings and the markings. All the progress we've done on that has been great. The smart mounts, but in terms of the glass themselves, the cleaner it gets, the better it gets on a really clean sensor. Is now almost a double negative.
Yeah, I mean, the comment I hear is that people are looking for personality. I mean, Mr. Primes, I mean, is that your real name?
I don't know. Thank you. You said personality, and then you looked at me. I appreciate that.
That's true.
Although I prefer zooms. I do, because I like, and it's not, I'm not one of these nitpickers that, oh my God, look at that. The zooms are so good these days. They're amazing. But the zoom gives you a chance to slide a little bit and to add a little bit of z-axis, and to it's just a tool for shot making. I think it's easier to work with zoom. So, despite my name,
I never would have guessed.
I want to say that I saw Bill Bennett do a beautiful demo once at Cinegear, and he had a number of different cameras going, and the oldest one was a Panaflex with a Primo, and you had the latest Zeiss lenses and everything else there. But he had Gary Yoshino pulling focus on that, and it was clear and away the sharpest. Not the lens on one of Suny's tests. It wouldn't be sharper than the Zeiss, but in Gary's hands. So you can't separate the artist from the gear. The gear does, as I think you were saying, nothing by itself. You could take a lens that was not as crisp in Gary Yoshino's hands and have something sharper than otherwise. So I think a lot is, what are you used to? What instrument are you used to? It's not, the gear doesn't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah, I wanted to shift the conversation just a bit to the distribution side of the business, and to see how that has impacted the art and the craft. In 1989, I found some statistic that talked about 179 cable TV channels in 1989. I think there's 179 HBO channels now, and it's actually almost impossible to measure the number of outlets these days, because it's become the internet. There was a wonderful article in New York Magazine last month that compared 1989 Miramax funding Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, Netflix funding House of Cards, which has opened up a new market. And then it talks about some of the other web series that are in development. One of them caught my eye. It says it's about a pair of production assistants struggled to make it in New York with crappy soul-wrecking gigs on bad reality TV shows, often funny but also bleak as hell. So the question is, with all of these outlets, is there more opportunity, or is there more pressure to work for nothing? Let's ask Rob.
There's certainly the pressure to work for nothing. I mean, there's certainly, the budgets on these things. That, I'm coming into the world of features at the 18-day schedule is the longest. Maybe 22 at the most. And so it's this pressure to up the page count, bring the schedule down, squeeze as many locations into the shoot as possible, and have a crew of 3 and 3 that you're paying them $150 a day. It's the pressure that comes with that is tremendous. And then to try to create quality out of that is even more weight on your shoulders. So in terms of opportunity, I mean, there's a more, the variety, I think, is more than maybe it ever has been in terms of, in my bio, I'd mentioned internet content and internet commercials. And so, there's been the opportunity for me to shoot things for brands that I would have never been able to do for a national spot, but for internet, there's a lot more leeway there. So I think that has opened up a lot of doors.
You had mentioned something, I'm going to jump back a little bit. It involves distribution, but it also involves cameras, but it also involves displays. Because we sort of haven't talked about displays. There's something coming down the pike that you may have heard of called high dynamic range, or extended dynamic range. Dolby, which is a company everybody knows because they've been doing very, very high-end sound work, both for in your car and in your home and in the cinema, they're now doing very, very high-end imaging work. And they developed a monitor that has extremely high dynamic range. All these monitors sitting here, well, they're all sitting out in the sun, but they have an output, if it's set to the Rec 709 standard, of 100 nits. It has to do with the amount of light. It's a unit of light coming out of the screen. 100 nits is really, really dim compared to the monitor that Dolby made. They made an experimental monitor that had an output of 4,000. Now, anybody that's seen it, it's a life-changing experience. I mean, you're nodding and shaking your head. I can tell you till you're blue in the face, and you'll agree with me, but what they do is they recolor time material shot with high dynamic range cameras, whether it be Red Dragon or Alexa or scanned film negative, but they distribute the tonal range across all those tremendous range of dynamic range, which also makes the color palette bigger, and the image is remarkable. Now, the interesting thing is the monitors that we saw were HD. Yet the images, when you see it, blows you away. So there's a lot more to a high-quality image than resolution, number of pixels across the screen. More significant than that is the brightness range that the monitor can reproduce. The cameras can already do it. The high-end cameras, you've demonstrated in your testing, so have I. I shot a lot of the test material that Dolby uses now. We just used a stock Alexa shooting ARRI-RAW. Of course, I went out looking for trouble for really high dynamic range scenes. I shot a highly polished silver airplane flying with sun glittering on the wings above dark canyons, trying to find really high dynamic range. But the point is, the monitors can now do it. The cameras can do it. It's what's in between. The distribution channels can't do it. And that's where people are struggling to come together with a set of standards that will allow that high dynamic range signal to come from the camera through post, downstream through the distribution channels, whether it be streaming or broadcast over the air or cable, out to a high dynamic range monitor. But you're going to hear more and more about extended dynamic range or high dynamic range.
It is so emotionally grabbing, even on stuff that wasn't shot for high dynamic range. I think when the artists get used to this medium, the saturation of the colors is like nothing you've ever seen before. And at 100,000 to 1 range between the blacks and the whites, if you shoot for this, if you can have a painter's perspective, you can get a subjective, powerful, visual horsepower out of this that we just haven't seen before. I think it's a big thing coming, and if you guys are looking for what's the next big thing, boy, I would bet on this. I don't know anything about the commercial part of it, but creatively, artistically, it's totally amazing.
Yeah, well, that leads into our kind of final topic. You know, trying to look a little bit into the crystal ball. 25 years from now, it'll be what, 2039. We'll all come back here and talk about this again, I hope.
He'll have the gray hair.
There's a high dynamic range. There's this thing called a light field camera that lets you capture and then later decide what your point of focus is, what your depth of field. We've talked about drones. We've got this autofocus technology emerging. We've got a 1,000-frame camera. Michelle, what's the emerging technology that you're most excited about?
I think the high dynamic range is actually the most exciting thing that we're on the verge of, and the ability of an OpenEXR ACES format to contain the high dynamic range as well as other data that can be reprocessed again when we have the technology to display it. So I think we'll hear a lot more about the ACES and OpenEXR formats for containing that, and the high dynamic range is actually, it's like you get if you look at the ocean and you were to shoot something, we're used to seeing what an interpretation is of the ocean with the sand and someone's face that's partly shaded in the foreground. We're used to seeing what that translates to with either a film capture or a digital capture, and then marrying with a display. And when you see high dynamic range displaying that very same footage, it's like you get the subtle colors of the ocean back, you get the play of the light on the water, you get the sparkle of the sun, you don't get the sky completely blown out to white. And so you get this sort of magic that we have in nature, you get it back, and you get to be stimulated by it. So I think the high dynamic range is actually number one in the short term.
Suny, I mean, in 25 years, are we going to be all looking through goggles and doing 360-degree experiences?
Well, you know, I think the hardest part for our entertainment business is one-upping, you know, what we already get for free, right? We've always said, I remember even as a kid, people said when video came out, that was the end of cinema. When you could go to Blockbuster and rent a video, why would you go to the movies? That obviously proved not to be true. When radio came out, it said it was the end of records. There's an experience in the cinema that is a communal experience, and that'll always be there. But I think the question is going to be, how do we keep providing something exciting for viewers and younger generations to do? I think certainly what you were mentioning, VR is a big thing. You might have heard of Oculus Rift, a $2 billion buy without a product. We've never sold anything, and it was a $2 billion buy. I happen to know 2 or 3 other R&D projects right now that are all focused on immersive experiences. The idea of creating a 360-degree wrap of not just a video game, but live action that you would be part of. So some test footage that I saw really of early beta stuff is they went to a YouTube concert with camera trees, you know, 6 dragons in a tree, and basically creating this real VR experience where you're hopping up and down, and behind you there's somebody hopping up and down, and Bono's right there, and you can walk forward through the crowd, and you're going through the audience to go reach him. So I think those VR experiences are going to be there. But I think, as these guys were saying, I totally agree that one thing that will die, in my opinion, is this pixel war. I think we're on this 2K, 4K, 6K, 8K stuff. It's so irrelevant. We've done so many tests at HBO looking at 4K on a 55-inch display and a 65-inch display against 2K, and mixing and matching, and people coming in, very talented eyes, not being able to tell the difference. It's just not big enough of a display. If you have very sharp, very good contrasty 2K, very low contrasty 4K, people go, oh, that's the 4K, and they're getting it wrong. So they're judging contrast and resolution versus just pixel count. And that's where I think Bill's absolutely right. The stuff I saw on the Pulsar monitor, well, one, I almost needed sunglasses. It was so bright.
That's the Dolby monitor.
Yeah, the Dolby Pulsar. It's 4,000 nits is very difficult to describe to somebody who hasn't seen it. It is like the sun is shining in your face, but it's coming from a monitor. It first took me by surprise how bright it was, because we were in a dark room at Dolby. I had to literally go, okay, wait, hold on. Let my iris settle. Okay, now let's watch this thing. Because it is three-dimensional. I personally, I make it public, I'm not a fan of 3D, mainly because it's an artifice. I don't believe that when I go see a movie and I see this bizarre hologram, that's meant to reproduce what my left and right eye can actually see. I can close my eye and not lose my balance. So there's other elements that have to do with dimension. dimensionality that I think 3D doesn't address. But when you have high dynamic range imagery, it does look three-dimensional. There is a depth to the image that is real, that is perceivable and palpable. So I know at HBO there's been a lot of work going in that direction. Color depth, color bit, and EDR, essentially. Because you have to realize this, your big movies will be watched on 4-inch displays. That's just a reality. So the fact that they're in 8K or 16K, completely irrelevant. The fact that those displays have a very high pixel pitch and can actually display, an OLED phone can show you a lot more than that monitor right here. So you could show EDR on an iPhone and get that depth experience that you can't get from having an 8K image on an iPhone. So I think you're going to see a little, my hope is that this pixel war will die and we're going to start looking more at color depth and color density, and I think it will be combined with a VR experience. I think people want immersive as much as possible, and I think you're going to see a lot more of those technologies.
I think distribution is already changing. Everybody probably heard it earlier this week. HBO announced that they're going to start streaming their content. Well, this is your... Yeah, in 2015. Netflix already produces a show that you see on the internet. I have a feeling that in 5 years, broadcast television may just fade away, and maybe cable channels will fade away too, certainly in 25 years. Yeah. The product will be the internet will be much, much faster, and it won't be 100 channels or 200 channels or 500, it'll be hundreds of thousands of channels. Yeah. And then to fight for dominance in a field of 100,000 channels, that's going to be the challenge.
Very true, very true.
Very interesting.
A lot of it, by the way, has to do with infrastructure. It's not that people want the cable channels to go away. For them to pipe a 4K signal through a 3 gig SDI cable that was designed for 50 megabit is very difficult. To do it on the internet, you turn on Google Fiber, and we can watch 8K tomorrow morning. So for HBO, it makes a lot of sense that they can just literally hit a switch and give you a program in 4K, give it to you in 2K, give it to you in standard F, all within one switch. Whereas the networks that are now the switchers and the broadcast antennas, for them it's very, very difficult to repackage those signals. So the infrastructure cost of going that way, I think, is just unfeasible. That's why IP over television is a necessity, and we don't have a choice. It's going to go there.
Mr. Primes, you want to have the last word?
Oh, I don't know if it's the last word, but I think quantity will never be a satisfactory substitute for quality. Having quick cuts, having big walk-around virtual reality, having all the tricks of all the tiny cameras that can get any place and all that, that's style. And we tire style very easily. Oh, we can do this now, we can do this now, we can do this now. Oh, now it's 4K, tomorrow it's HDR, whatever like that. And I like HDR. I think stories that grab you emotionally, I think actors and stories that are in the moment, I think slow cinema, I think powerful, compelling stories that grab you and have depth, just like classical painting, classical music, will endure for a long time. And the other things, they'll kind of come and go. But I just think that if you concentrate on telling moving, touching, meaningful stories, you'll prevail in the end.
Well, I find it interesting that Christopher Nolan is releasing his next movie for the first 2 weeks in 7mm 5 perf and film IMAX, which is very, very interesting.
Yep.
He has enough horsepower to say that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's the
and I'm going to be first in line to see it because I'm sure it's going to be mind-blowing.
Yeah. Well, we're just about out of time. Panel, thank you for joining us. And again, the story of Pete and Rich Abel. Congratulations again on 25 years. And thanks for joining us.